Are you ready?
Yes.
Perfect. We'll start letting folks in. Hello, greetings, everyone. Hi. Tonight we have our Thursday night series. I'm Carolina Wheat, curator at Artfare, artist liaison, some other hats, but I'm really happy to be here with Maya Jay Varadaraj.
Yes.
Varadaraj. I will try to say it close, not perfect, but the fact is you've been hosting these Thursday night studio visits for the last gosh, it's really been a year now. We've been scheduling them out, and I'm just happy to have you here tonight, Maya. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Oh, good. Well, I know that it's kind of been a wild ride being an artist through lockdown and otherwise, and I kind of like to start with, kind of where are you right now? Are you based in New York?
Yeah, I'm based in New York. I live in Manhattan. I'm on 21st Street, which is super lucky. Yeah, I love it here.
And then during lockdown or during quarantine, did you have access to a studio?
Well, I've been working out of my house for a while now, and I actually gave up my studio just almost right before the pandemic started in October. So I kind of got used to working at home. So you're in my studio right now as we speak, actually.
Fantastic. It's really fortunate, and there's been so many artists that I've spoke to both through this forum as well as just doing personal art, studio visits with folks. I would say more than half are definitely in a home studio at this point. And if there's space, it's such a wonderful bounty. It's so fortunate to be able to have a space that you can make within your home. I know that quarters can be very tight in some cities. So it's nice to have a little bit of extra room to do that. And so what are you say your studio's in your home. Do you live by yourself? Or are you sharing a studio? Do you have a partner that's like, hey, move this way?
I am married and I have 2 cats. So when I say studio, I actually just mean my coffee table. So I tend to I tend to kneel over my work or bend over my work. So I usually work on the floor anyway. So if I don't have wall space, it's not a big deal. And my coffee table is sizable. So as long as I have some kind of surface, I'm okay. And sometimes I have to shuffle around the furniture if I'm working on a bigger piece. But generally, it's been okay. I think relationships have changed so much also in quarantine. I think our pets are getting sick of us. So we're getting sick of the people that we live with. It's just getting, it's getting tense,
Yeah. And I know as we have more and more folks coming in here, we'll get to some of that work that you both made during quarantine a little bit, as well as prior to that. And with your cats, though, you mentioned your pets or whatever, do you find it ever cumbersome or frustrating? Are your cats getting into your work and making it dirty, or have they destroyed any work, I guess is my question.
Well, when I was making furniture, back in the day, my cat actually destroyed a piece of furniture. He jumped on it, and it was an acrylic table, and it just went to pieces.
Oh, no.
But in terms of they tend to just sit on paper. I'm sure you know this. They have to sit on whatever you're working on, so they tend to do that. I haven't seen any paw prints yet. I do frequently get cat hair in all of my paint, so that's fair. But I feel like it's charming, so it works.
It is.
Yeah.
We just received a shipment from an artist that we work with, my partner and I. And it was rolled up and it shipped cross country, and with every single piece we unrolled, there was like kind of more and more dog hair.
Wow.
And so another home studio. So that's why I ask, because
Yes.
currently, we have to cover everything in our studio so the cat doesn't, get the paw prints on it.
Yeah.
But this is story for another day. The fact is, I'm really excited to talk about your work. It comes
Yeah.
from a conceptually personal space, as
Mhm.
well as a cultural space and a feminist space. And so, like, I'm just excited that you agreed to talk to me today, and it's not just going to be about cat hair. I
No.
promise, for those that are listening, and also for those that are joining us, thank you so much. Please just feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to share those questions with Maya as we move along. But I am really interested in learning a little bit more about your process and
Yeah.
how you find um, your concepts through your visual language that you use. And I know that you were mentioning kind of like pre-interviews, and when we did the Brooklyn Rail thing, you had mentioned a little bit about humor, but I suppose it would be a really good time to maybe start your
Yeah.
presentation.
I'll get my screen shared with everyone. Are you able to see my screen, but not my notes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I was thinking about how to start my presentation, and I had been sort of like reviewing some applications myself, and it sort of took me back to when I had written stuff. And you're right, Carolina, like I tend to go back to humor from time to time because some of the subject matter that I look at is very heavy. And so frequently I have to like pry myself from my work, engage in some lighthearted humor. And some of that is just like going back to my past and sort of like critiquing what I was doing or how I was feeling at that time. And I just had to bring this up because this was actually my application to undergrad. And for some silly, godforsaken reason, I decided that I was going to describe myself as a tin of soup. And it was terrible. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought,
Were you thinking of Warhol? I mean, what do you?
I think the punchline was a tin of soup can be made famous by Warhol, but I had this like very roundabout way of talking about how it can be turned into powder that will depict progress. Like, I don't know how, but anyway, and also my brother's critique of my statements of purpose, which I find hilarious, like him saying, please don't quote Socrates, he's a philosopher, not an artist. And that passion for art and untamed talent, which I think we all sort of use like in our generic SOPs, is not going to get me to university.
Well, I think some folks know this about me, but I know Maya, I think we had discussed kind of earlier, but I worked as an admissions,
Right. Oh, I didn't know that. No.
admissions for 20 years plus.
Okay.
20 years. And one was at the School of the Arts of Chicago. I was there a little before you were there, but the amount of essays that I had to read in order to, well, I mean, you read the essay, you read the statements, you have the portfolio, the transcripts, the references. And yes, so I really appreciate this tin of soup because it's a very undergrad thing to do. Or this was undergrad, right?
Yes.
Well, the worst was the the worst was when people would start with, I've always known I was an artist. Ever since
I've started many an SOP like that.
And I would talk to my other admissions counselors in the engineering department or in the architecture department, and engineering would be like, ever since I ever worked with Legos. And then, architecture would be like, tiddlywinks were my thing. It's just like, you do kind of go back to those basics, and when you're trying to write something about your passion. And I can understand what your brother says. The reason I'm going on this little bit of a digression is because passion for art and untamed talent is not going to get you into a university.
No, it
He's
is not.
100% right.
Well, I want to apologize for the many applications I probably sent your way. They were probably very dense and difficult to read.
I don't think I read yours. I don't think I read yours because I was only there from 2004 to 2010.
I'm sure I applied to the Art School of the Art Institute of Chicago as an undergraduate student as well.
All right.
But so I wanted to start off on this light note because I feel like this kind of critique and this kind of humor and self-critique has always been a part of my practice, and I thought it would be a fun way to connect back to my process. My work actually comes from my graduate thesis project while I was a graduate student at SAIC. So this is the installation view of it, and the project is called Kandayati, which means to break in Sanskrit. And so this project is very important to my practice because it sort of gave way to other parts of my practice and work. So to get into this, this is a process that I designed to crush and reform glass bangles that women in India wear. So let's talk about glass bangles for a second, because I think that a lot of people who visit India, especially women, sort of just think that these glass bangles are, accessories and they're decorative and they're just like a fashion statement. They're not. So they have a lot more meaning than that. And growing up, I knew that they were sort of like, if I broke them, I would kind of get into trouble, or it was taboo, it was unlucky for me. So women are always like cautious around these glass bangles. But I started to research them a little bit more, and I found that there's a lot of cultural practices that sort of show how embedded in violence and subjugation that object actually is. Like, for example, when women are married, they have to wear these glass bangles for 30 days, and they're made out of glass. And if in that interim period, the woman breaks these bangles by mistake, then she's considered bad luck for her husband, not for herself, but for her husband and his family. Right. And it's allocated to women. So it's automatically sort of become this symbol of inferiority. And that kind of thinking has seeped into our political language as well, where in pre-1947, supporters of the national movement would basically give non-supporters glass bangles as a way to shame them. So it's like present day, it would be like calling someone a pussy, right? But women are continuously wearing this. And what I found, what was really interesting, is that Uttar Pradesh is the largest manufacturer of these glass bangles, right? And they have the highest cases of gang violence towards women. So I thought that coincidence was like really interesting, and I wanted to engage with this material culture some more. So I started with the act of breaking them, right? And there comes the humor. I'm like, I don't care, I'm going to break this stuff. And I started trying to figure out different ways of breaking it. So one of the ways was that I just started putting it into a blender. And this is exactly what this is. So the first machine that you see is a wet grinder, which is a common kitchen appliance from India. So I dumped these glass bangles in there. And you can see the process here. They get crushed up. So the sound is really interesting because as much, it gets smoother and smoother because it really like crushes it into like fine powder. And so since I started using the wet grinder, I was like, okay, I want to keep this in the domestic realm because the kitchen is another place where women are often subjugated, and women are supposed to be domestic. So I connected the wet grinder to a vacuum cleaner. This is a vacuum cleaner, and I stripped these machines of their aesthetic qualities because I didn't want them to have the sort of ergonomic shells around them. I wanted them to be raw. So here the vacuum cleaner sucks up these shards and transports them into a mixing bowl. And then the mixing bowl is taken to this third station, to this third station where I found this microwavable kiln that melts glass in a microwave. So, and it melts it into the shape, which I'd like to call a Durga Chakra. So Durga Chakra is basically a spinning weapon that the goddess Durga, the strongest manifestation of feminine energy, she uses that to obliterate ignorance in Hindu mythology. So I thought that was really fitting. And the entire installation, so these are the examples of the chakras that I made.
And what are those? Those are, that's the glass that was remelted into a new form.
Yes.
And the form themselves is again cylindrical or circular in a way. Was that your intention?
Yes, because the Durga Chakra is circular and it is made by spinning. Like it turns into a weapon when it spins. So I wanted these objects to be made with the process of spinning. So while it's in the microwave, it is technically spinning. So
sure.
And the bigger, the image to your right actually is a larger chakra, and that was made by pouring the glass onto a spinning surface.
It's just got such a fantastic Ouroboros quality to it, right? As if we've turned it on its tail or whatever, you know, you could see almost the head and the tail of the snake being consumed. The tail consumed by the head of the snake, which I know Gudra Chakra is, you know, an almighty, powerful weapon. I find, you know, maybe the relationship between the circle of the beginning and the end also really compelling. Just, you know, because of the forms themselves are not pristine.
So this was what the installation looked like, and as you can see in the back, they were accompanied by these collages. And again, these collages, the source images were taken from calendar illustrations from pre-independent India. So I'm connecting the vernacular and the sort of like visual culture from the same time period. And here I use the calendar illustrations because again, they have a very specific place in the home, right? They're there as a decorative means. And they're also kind of like silently telling women how they should behave and how they should look and, you know, what they should wear. And that's exactly how I was responding to them, because at that time I was just sort of like critical of these women and how prescribed they seemed to me. So my position here was to sort of like mask their identity, to sort of obliterate their identity, to have the viewer really question their state of being in their perceived locations.
Yet you've also added some of the structural ephemera of vacuum cleaner or other household objects, whether domesticated tea sets and things like that, so kind of obliterating their personhood by way of, you know, taking their portrait,
yes,
you know, and, you know, obscuring it. But then, you know, this also, if you could just talk a little bit about a old empty space,
right,
where you've left this in the middle of a void.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I left the void because I wanted the viewer to sort of fill in those gaps, right? Like where, and those gaps are interesting because I've had these interesting conversations with people where they're like, oh, well, there's another piece where they're like, oh, but these women look like they're smiling. I'm like, well, you think they're smiling? Why do you think they're smiling? What is going on around them? Like, what are they doing that you think that they're smiling, right? So the white space sort of like gets people to project their own sort of like stereotypical understanding of where these women might have been. in that way, like when we sort of start to parse out these stereotypes, we bring them to light and we can actually talk about them, you know? It's a way to sort of like bring what's hiding in the dark, like to the surface.
And then Maya, I believe it was the installation shot previous to this close-up of the 2D work. You present this miniature factory, or like in a little space, as you've kind of defamed it from the ergonomics, which I find very thoughtful. Yet you've also put them on semi pedestals with a vitrine over it, or like that plexi over it. Talk to me a little bit about the decision and why you chose to put it under a vitrine like that.
So actually, one detail that I'd like to point out is that they all sit on top of quartz stones, which are commonly used in kitchen surfaces. So I think you can sort of see that here. Can you see that in the image?
Yes, definitely.
And the reason why I put them under a vitrine is because part of the way I had positioned this exhibition as this is a sort of like a protest that has already happened, and this like entire situation has been encapsulated as a changing point in time. Like one woman got really frustrated and like went through this narrative, destroyed her bangles, like turned them into these Durga Chakras, and it's now like become this like beginning of protest, which is why I put them under vitrines.
I see. So it's a singular event, a performative almost event that's both personal and its own. And I see. Okay. And so that you're not inviting anyone to break their glass bangles with this, kind of machine that you've made, or the process by which of literally smashing the patriarchy.
Yeah, I wanted this particular exhibition to feel like this has happened, but for sort of like subsequent iterations of this project, I have thought about actually making it like a live thing where I could have people interacting with it and putting the bangles in and turning it into the Durga Chakras. But that also has its implications for the women who are participating, and I don't want to be sort of frivolous with that. I feel like it takes some time to parse through those thoughts and see what is the most meaningful and effective way that this can be meaningful to another woman, right? So I wanted to take my time with that.
Okay. Very nice.
So as I was searching these calendar illustrations, I had come across painted photographs, which is another sort of colonial technique that flourished in India pre-1947 and then post as well. And this is where photographs, like studio photographs, are taken and then embellished because they're not ornate enough. This is around about the time when Ravi Varma prints were also becoming very popular and accessible in India. So photographs, people wanted their photographs to have that same sort of richness. And here again, I noticed that women had this very like delicate, outtake, or they were in familial roles, or they were women of the court. So I wanted to talk about my relationship with the machines, because I had a very like interesting relationship with the machines as I was taking them apart for Kandayati, and I didn't see that being portrayed anywhere, right? Where you're changing the agency of the machines to support women versus subjugate them. And you see that frequently with, machines in the way that they use women's bodies to advertise, right? It's very it can feel very subjugative because the women are generally very highly sexualized and commodified because they're positioned to sell the machines. Whereas here you're looking at these very laissez-faire, relationship between the woman and the machine. You possibly in a domestic setting, but it's kind of like in disarray because maybe her priorities are somewhere else. In some of these, she's a part, like fully integrated with the machine, whereas some she's, sort of more like a friendly or maternal relationship with the machines. And with the first series, I was painting a lot more loosely, and it felt a little bit more natural. But with the second series of the machines, I sort of went really traditional with the painting and sort of like tightened up the technicality of the painting. Started referencing more of the Ravi Varma style of painting, which actually made me really uncomfortable. I have to tell you, this was like a huge learning curve for me because I was like, I don't like painting like this. And it was at like really big scale. So this was at 48 by 72. And I tried it and it just felt really awkward. But I learned a lot from it because I felt like, maybe injecting so much tradition is not giving these women or the narrative that I want to tell as much depth as I thought it would.
Yeah, they're very large.
Yeah,
40,
they're really
that's
big.
almost 50 inches. You're speaking in inches or centimeters?
Inches.
Yeah, that's quite a large photograph, well, slash collage. And I know you mentioned they're coupled by these engines or machines and other things. Where are you sourcing those?
Online. So I mean, the photographs I took myself. So there was a performative element of it where I set up my SLR on a tripod and ran back and forth and took all of these images, and then I found these engines and then digitally collaged them and then had them printed on canvas and then painted on top of them. So it was kind of like an elaborate process.
Right.
And I think going big was very intimidating, and I like clenched up and I was like, I'm gonna paint this like really tight. And so actually you'll see the piece on your left, like I've transformed it because it like I was very uncomfortable painting like this, and I actually went back and painted over it, which I'll show you. So then COVID happened, and we were at home, and I had printed a bunch of source materials, and I was like, okay, well, I have time to like think about this now. And at the same time, I started working at Poster House. I'm one of their educators, and we were teaching exhibitions on Chinese calendar advertising, which is like basically like the Indian counterpart, which was super serendipitous. And what I had found is that with the Chinese posters, like the women that were shown in those posters were actually the progressives of that time. They sort of embodied the more progressive women. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Maybe I need to go and learn a little bit more about the women that I've been so harsh towards or like so critical towards. And I found that, women were sort of like used to play political tug of war at this time, because you had the very traditional nationalist sentiments, the visuals that the feminine visuals that surrounded like the national sentiments, and the Ravi Varma deities, which were very much so traditional. And then you had this like hybrid colonial woman who was very much so embracing a more progressive life, maybe perhaps, being a little bit more independent, maybe having the possibility of getting educated. And these posters were embodying that woman. And I was like, that's really, really interesting, right? So while we're being critical of the colonial rule and like just, everything colonial, we do have to think about how these women were positioned in that tension, right? And so for me, I wanted to take that and give these women that kind of respect. So with these collages, instead of sort of like being violently critical of them, I'm sort of elevating them by putting them in these mandalas that automatically get people to be more introspective of the women in the pictures. And here, like with the newer versions of the collages, I'm paying a lot of attention to the gestures. So for example, the one on your left, you have a woman who has her hand on her hips, and then you have what seems like a male figure that's, on top, but the gaze is of the woman. The one on your right, there's very much so this guarding of something, and it's of another woman. So, feminist identities for sure. And so where did these sort of collages come from? So I want to talk about this because this is a project that I haven't talked about very much. And this is called Considered as Counting, which is a project that I'm actually going to be showing with a gallery in Bombay early next year. And it's going back to my installation work.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thanks. Thank you.
You have a couple of pieces like these on Artfare right now.
Yes. Both of these are on Artfare right now. So these pieces are ink on paper, and these are basically drawings that I made to translate statistics of crimes against women in India. So the Indian government publishes a document of generalized crime against people in India. And there's an entire section dedicated to crimes against women. And there are 52 categories of crime across 36 union territories and states. So like I said, my work gets heavy sometimes because parsing through these categories is really hard. And so I've taken these and I've sort of turned them into like wood blocks, which returns to another material culture from India, wood block printed fabrics that women generally wear. So the concept will be that there will be this performance that happens in the center, and I'm still back and forth between whether I want live craftsmen making these woodblock prints on site, or if I want a laser cutter cutting out these wood blocks, and then I will be live printing these fabrics with the translated numbers. So that's that project. So
rewind real quick. So Maya, you're printing the almost which seems like a symbolic language system.
Yes.
I just want to unpack it real quick. Back to the slide with the concentric circles.
Sure.
And so you're taking the data of violence against women in India and the different variances, and you're creating then. Talk to me just a little bit about what visually you're, say for instance, can someone read this?
Yeah, I'm going to have some kind of visual map that helps people understand it. But for right now, I can explain. So the drawings on your left, the one that I have my laser pointer on. So for example, I don't know if you can see the sort of pie chart sections of the circles right here.
Yes, it's subtle, but you can definitely see it.
So each section is a state and union territory. And the width of the allocated space of that section translates to how big population-wise that union, state, or territory is. Now, this dark section in here correlates to the crime, the total crime against women within that state. So I'm going to say that I can't read which one it is, and I haven't memorized them. But for example, Delhi would probably have a very small section of of the pie chart itself, but a very large occupancy of this dark spot. And this is the drawing below it is sort of reverse, where the total crime is presented on top. And then these smaller drawings are individual states and union territories. There are 80 of them. So I'm parsing through different categories, not just total crime. So it could be, I'm not sure, I think it was a category of dowry related crime against women. Yeah, so there are multiple different categories. So just parsing through and figuring out what kind of visual language I want to use. And so the concentric circles play a really important role because, again, they critique this violence and the subjugation in religion, right? Because Hinduism uses a lot of concentric circles in our visual language. So to root that in cultural practices and religious practices as well. And this will be the layout for the installation as I have it planned. And this is also important because I don't know if anyone has been to a Hindu temple, but generally the shrine is always in the middle and you sort of pay homage to the deity in the shrine by walking around the shrine itself. So in order to view the concentric circles that are being printed on the fabric, you have to walk around the shrine, the central piece multiple times. So again, it's like laid out like a temple to critique it back into that same origin.
And you, so you mentioned you're printing it on fabric. Have you decided any kind of, what fabrics you might be using or where you're going to source it, or are you going to be printing it yourself, and in which way will you be silk screening or woodblock, or are they going to be batik, or thoughts on that?
So we're going to be using khadi cloth, which is a typical sort of cotton-based cloth in India that is usually used for saris. And the yardage will again correlate to the sari yardage, which is eight yards. And then the printing will be woodblock printed. So each of those circles that you saw will be a block. And the process of making them, that's where I'm like, I'm not sure which way I want to go, because one of the ideas is to have this vitrine in the middle and have 3 male craftsmen sit inside the vitrine and carve out these wood blocks to sort of like reverse that male gaze. As well as have men sort of sit and think about these numbers and like be immersed in these numbers, which is crimes against women. And then the other idea is to have to take the human element out of it and just have a laser cutter to again bring that agency of machinery, autonomy, and progression to women, and have a laser cutter make the wood blocks, and then I would be printing them. Yeah. So it's kind of like it will be like a live installation that keeps growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Then how long is the show up for in Bombay?
We're planning for it to be up for about 4 or 5 weeks. So quite a bit.
And the name of the gallery was?
Method Gallery.
Method.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's very ambitious. It sounds so fun. I worked in textiles years ago, and printing on fabric is just, it really is so fun. For me, at least, it takes a lot of precision, and it also
I have a lot of experimenting to do.
And it also takes a very clean way about you, like precision, and just like you work with your core a lot to make sure that the fingers don't get too dirty or whatever the case. But you'll be printing then on the fabric, likely with with dyes or inks? Are you going to
I'm
be?
thinking of inks, yeah, for right now, probably just black ink. Yeah, I have a lot of experimenting to do with this, so.
This is so exciting, and really how it's encapsulating one singular idea, and
Mhm.
to bring that performative aspect in by having male identifying folks in the center
Yeah.
doing the labor
Mhm.
and living in it.
Yeah.
It's good work so far. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so you can see where the form then came from for the collages, because I was directly referencing these drawings and pulling them into these collages, because again, I wanted to elevate these women with that kind of mandala introspection, but also root them in like the reality that is for women in these statistics. And like, you know, we are elevated because of just who we are and what we do, but at the same time, like, we're grounded in the reality that it's just, the world is not very safe for us.
Yes.
And the other ways that I've been working with these numbers is through painting. And for example, with this painting, I just sort of started putting the numbers that I saw directly from the website. The document onto this painting of this like elderly woman who's like sitting and just seeming to be thinking. And this is because it's not just men who subjugate women in India. And, you know, a lot of it is like a lot of women on women action, which is unfortunate. And I know that we were sort of talking about that because you have a friend who talks about anti-shade, right?
Mhm.
And one of the biggest problems with that is this problem of colorism, right? Because a lot of elder, like, you know, older generation of women tend to uphold those values. And it's really frustrating when you're a newer generation trying to, you know, work against these kind of things. So I had posted for people on my Instagram to share an experience that was rude. And I had, you know, posted an experience of colorism on my own. And the response that I got was overwhelming. These are some that I've gotten permission from these people to share them, but you know, critiquing like someone's 14-day-old child, the one in the middle about like, you know, why is she so dark? My mother replied, because of your son. Like, that's kind of badass, but at the same time, it's still colorism, combating colorism, because you're like saying it's because someone else is dark. It shouldn't be that case in the first place. Asian on Asian colorism, right? Like, you know, colorism within the Asian community, which is really, really difficult, especially when you live here, because it's like, you know, we're supposed to support each other. We're supposed to, you know, to bring our communities together. But when these kind of things happen, we're constantly upholding these sort of white supremacist ideologies, and we're not able to sort of like see that these things were put in place to keep us all segregated and you know, not elevated at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, so these were very difficult to sort of like go through, but it started, you know, getting me to think about how can I represent this colorism, how do I want to respond to it. So I started making a series of paintings like from my personal sort of archive. These are my aunts when they were younger. And I paint these people with like very different skin tones, so that there's no sort of like critique of their skin tone at all. Blues and greens and purples, and all of them are sort of like named as, you know, two sisters in their color of their skin.
Mm.
And again, you have this relationship and reference to the statistical drawing to connect it back to my other work. Same as here, this is an image of my mother and my aunt, painted with green skin. This is me and my brothers. And then these are just people that I sort of painted from memory. But this was a way that I sort of like tried to sort of, how do you say this? Like think about it in my own way, like visually, like how I would want to go forth. And I think that this is also very like intrinsic in our like mythological narratives as well, like with Krishna having blue skin. And so there is historic narrative where skin tone didn't matter, but we've been sort of conditioned by these colonial ways of thinking that it does, and we continue to like uphold it, which is just so frustrating.
Well, right, the social construct of race and how that white supremacy is imbued in our everyday. And in relationship to Hindu mythology, bringing up Krishna's blue skin or Kali or, other deities that had varying skin colors, which is earthly. I find it kind of compelling, and maybe it's just a thought, not a question, yet the unearthliness of these works and bringing it to, perhaps if you're knowledgeable, a deity kind of setting, but thereby blessing what is an earthly creature with, the potential for mysticism or, special gift that's given to a bodhisattva deity. And so I really value these thoughts. I'm going to keep processing them. My last thing is just, how new are these?
I made these in 2020. The first one that I made, the one with my aunts, like the two girls, that I made early this year. But I've been going back and forth between like collage and painting. But yeah, you're right. I think that these are elements of my culture that I find are beautiful and inclusive, and and they've been masked by these like laws and traditions and just colonial values, and unearthing them and sort of like pushing them to the forefront is what like sort of drives my work. So we're back to that painting that I was telling you about. So I was so uncomfortable with it, and I was like, I have to go back and do something, because like my thinking has changed, like my research has changed. And so I went from that to now this. And this piece is actually on view at Sapar right now. And I used this lattice pattern because I was looking at this Mughal manuscript, which is the Nujum al-Ulum, which is a document from 16th century, the Mughal Empire. And it actually sort of is a document that talks about Hindu practices as well as Islamic practices. So it's really interesting. And I believe that there are more documents that exist like that. And I love that, because I was like, wow, this like document is like creating this like unity that doesn't actually exist right now. And I started pulling visual language from there, and this lattice pattern is from there. And again, I referenced the statistical drawings and the patterning, and I just feel a lot more comfortable with this kind of painting. It just feels a lot more authentic for me. Did you have a question about that?
Oh, it's it's a mere, it's a figment of what it was. I mean, you changed it so much formally that I have no real questions. It's just a comment.
It's like a totally different work. But yeah, I so much happier with it now. And I use this lattice pattern in other parts of my work, some in collage, some in drawing. This is something that I continue to explore. And that document is something that I continue to study and look and reference. And then we have, this is where I use it, and this is for a show that I made for the show, the solo show that I had at Established Gallery. And so I thought this was a good point to talk about how hair has a big part of my work, because hair is another way in which women, especially Indian women, are subjugated. And there's this like really interesting narrative about Indian women's hair and Black women's hair, which I am new to, but it was also such an engaging conversation when this show went up at Established Gallery, because I had a lot of really robust conversations with Black women who were like, this hits home for us. Like, we know what you're talking about. And I was like, yes. And, this relationship between Black women buying Indian women's hair and where that comes from, because a lot of Indian women donate their hair at temples as like a sacrifice. And then they're taken and they're, turned into these things that are bought by Black women. So I made these ink drawings, and these are also large. But yeah, there's just concept of hair as a commodity and like this way of, again, objectifying women. And now we're here, and this is a piece that I was working on yesterday. Actually, it was just this is just like a time-lapse video of me painting work, and I've been thinking about these narratives that I wrote back in 2020 of like all of these. I would do these like daily journal entries that were live written on Instagram, and one of them was, when I was going through puberty, my mom took me and she got my hair cut in India, but no one in India knew how to cut curly hair. So I ended up with a mullet, and it was really bad. And then my mom was like trying to convince me that like my hair looked really good. And she decided that she was going to go get her hair cut like that. And she looked terrible. So we were just like a bunch of very, women with like terrible haircuts. But this was like live writing, which you can find on my Instagram as well. It's on my IGTV. Some people don't have the patience for them, but if you enjoy my sense of humor, you can read them. They're fun.
Maya, I noticed in both painting and some of the collage work, as well as now these black and white works, you work in tandem. Well, there's always, maybe not always, but there's so often two figures or a portrait of two women, or there's just seems to be a lot of twinning happening.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to that, of your intentions, or if is there something that I'm
yeah, I mean, it's as simple as our existence is not singular.
True.
It's very complex. It's very we can't just be one thing. If we're a student, we're also a female student. We're not just student, exactly. So, I mean, there's never just one of us. We're not afforded that singularity, right? So I think that representing the woman as two has just always come naturally to me, because I feel like I've felt that duality a lot in my life, and I think all of us have. But yeah, thank you for asking that. I haven't actually been asked that.
Well, I was just kind of thinking a little more deeply about it in relationship to a gender binary, and your work is so feminist and righteous in a lot of ways, in every way, and I find a lot of value in the fact that when you're talking about singularity and you're talking about we're not living in that only one stream. We have communities, but we're also kind of two things. We're women, or we're gay women, or Indian women, or Black women, or Latinx, and it's
yeah.
that kind of binary thing that I'm just kind of riffing off of, because those two elements can also be very gender normative,
Hmm.
and yet often you're presenting two femme
Yeah.
identifying,
Hmm.
right? And so, and then with hair as well, there's just so much really fantastic things to think about in all of your work as a whole, and how these different styles are coming together in their own way. Especially, like, I'm appreciating the transitions between your installation based work to the collage to the painting and photographs to more collage, and then the drawings,
Yeah.
ink wash. What is your what are you really enjoying now? I mean, are you kind of doing it all, right? What
Yeah.
do you find the most maybe meditative and intrinsic pleasure from?
Um, I can't say that. Like I can't pick one thing. I think that what I love the most is like the research aspect of it all. I love just like finding new resources and finding new things to inform my practice and my process. So I think I'm happiest when I'm continuously learning, and that goes with like learning new processes as well. So I
Mm.
think with the installation at method, I'm going to really have to like learn how to be precise, like you said, with the printing of the textiles. So that's something that I'm excited about. um, there's a whole new set of statistics that I have to go through, so that's intimidating as well as exciting. But yeah,
Mm.
I that's where I'm at.
It is really impressive the way you're researching and digesting, and just really thinking about those statistics or the research that you're doing, and then turning it around to visually communicate um, in a really elegant and formal way.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
of course. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Pamela Council also wanted to shout out at the fact that not only Black women buy Indian hair, because white women do too.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's not as common these days because not everyone that's white wants to try to pull off a weave unless
I
you really have
Yes,
to.
I'm sorry I called out Black women like that, but it was such an interesting conversation for me. Um,
It's absolutely fascinating conversation, and certainly, it helps a lot of folks with cancer patients or wigs.
mhm,
Plenty of
yeah,
other folks running around.
mhm.
But I was gonna say that I don't know if anyone has any questions, but we've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah,
It went by kind of fast.
I know.
Or do you have any other slides, or do you want to?
Yeah, I have a lot more slides. Well, not a lot more, maybe a couple more. But so these are collages that I took the painted photographs, the photographs that I took for the painted photographs, um, and combined them with these colonial or pre-colonial, colonial illustrations, and that sort of created an interesting narrative of like this micro individual with like the macro cultural, this conversation that I really enjoyed, um sort of working and parsing through as well. And then I went into these collages where I was taking my photographs and then like making machine drawings out of them, completely immersing my identity in the machines, which is given a totally different outcome, which I'm continuing to explore. Um, and now I have all these like photographs that I took of factories that I get to experiment with and do really fun things with, and I'm excited. Yeah.
And are you shooting just with an SLR? Or are you shooting 4x5, or what are you taking images with?
I have a DSLR, but I'm not well versed with what kind it is. I just take the pictures.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I think that's the slides I have. So if anyone has any questions, or yeah.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. Well, I do appreciate how broad your practice is. Um, as I mentioned, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen at Method Gallery. Do you have anything in the works in New York in the near future, or like in your home, in the space you're residing now, or elsewhere? That
Not right now. I'm just, putting my head down and making new work. And if anything comes up, we'll definitely let you know.
well, you were just in a group show, and then you had your solo show you just mentioned as well.
Yeah,
So you have been busy over the
yeah,
last year.
definitely. Like the beginning of the year sort of started like very busy. I had my first solo show and then this group show, which has been really great. The artists are amazing. Nico is amazing. And Nina also so lovely. So it's been like such a nice beginning of the year.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing all your work. And
Thank you, Carolina. It's been so good to be in conversation with you.
absolutely, thanks for being on Art Fair. And
Yeah.
I hope to meet in person one day.
Yes, absolutely. That would be so good. Have such a lovely rest of the evening, and I speak to you soon.
You too. Ciao, everyone. Thanks for being here.